petty revenge landlord tried to evict me not knowing I already bought the house. The eviction notice was still warm from the printer when Derek slammed it against my door at 7 a.m. on a Tuesday. I could hear him breathing heavily on the other side, probably savoring what he thought was his moment of triumph. 30 days, college boy, he shouted through the wood. Should have thought about that before you decided to have your little study groups in MY house. I picked up the crumpled paper from where it had fallen, smoothing out the wrinkles as I read the laughably official-looking document he'd clearly drafted himself. Violation of lease terms, excessive noise, failure to comply with parking regulations. The list went on, each complaint more ridiculous than the last. Apparently, having 3 classmates over to work on our thesis project constituted running an illegal business, and parking my beat-up Honda in the driveway instead of on the street was unauthorized use of premium parking spaces. Derek Morrison had been making my life hell for 2 years, ever since I'd moved into this little craftsman house near campus. What started as minor power trips, surprise, inspections, nitpicking about the garbage cans being 2 inches too far from the curb, threatening to charge me extra for using the air conditioning, had escalated into full-blown harassment. The man seemed to genuinely believe that being a landlord made him some kind of feudal lord, and I was just another peasant to lord over. If only he knew. I walked to my desk and pulled out a manila folder I'd been keeping in the bottom drawer for 3 months now. Inside were documents that would make Derek's head spin: property deed, title transfer paperwork, homeowner's insurance policy, and my personal favorite, a letter from the estate attorney explaining how the original owner's daughter had been desperate to sell quickly after her mother passed, and how she'd been thrilled to find a cash buyer who could close fast, no questions asked. See, Derek had made one crucial mistake in all his years of petty tyranny. He'd never actually told me he owned the house. He just acted like it, collected rent like it, and threw his weight around like it. When Mrs. Chin passed away last year and her daughter Sarah inherited the property, Derek must have assumed he could just keep collecting rent and no one would be the wiser. What he didn't count on was Sarah being a thorough person who actually read her mother's papers and discovered that Derek Morrison was simply a property management company owner who'd been hired to handle maintenance requests 5 years ago. When Sarah called me in February to ask if I'd be interested in purchasing the house instead of continuing to rent, I thought it was too good to be true. Turns out, she'd been getting complaints from Derek about me for months, the same petty nonsense he'd been harassing me about, and she was fed up with dealing with him. She'd done some digging, found out he'd been collecting rent without authorization since her mother's death, and wanted him gone. I like you, she told me during our coffee meeting. Mom always said you were the perfect tenant, quiet, responsible, took care of the garden. Derek's been nothing but problems. You buy the house, and I'll sell it to you for under market value just to be done with this whole mess. 6 weeks later, after the fastest house buying process in history, I was officially a homeowner. Derek, meanwhile, had no idea his little kingdom had crumbled around him. I looked at the eviction notice again and couldn't help but smile. 30 days. Oh, Derek. You're going to wish you'd been nicer to your new boss. The next few days were absolute torture, but not for the reasons Derek expected. Every fiber of my being wanted to march over to his office and slam the deed down on his desk, just to see his smug face crumble. But Sarah's estate attorney had been very clear: let him hang himself. The more illegal activity he racks up between now and when you reveal ownership, the stronger your case becomes. So I played the part of the panicked tenant. I called Derek's office Wednesday morning, my voice carefully modulated to sound desperate. Mr. Morrison. This is about the eviction notice. I think there's been a misunderstanding. No misunderstanding, college boy, he cut me off. You've been warned multiple times about the noise and parking. This is what happens when tenants don't respect property. But sir, I've been paying rent on time for 2 years. Those were just study groups, and the parking. Save it for the housing court. 30 days means 30 days. The line went dead. Perfect. I made sure to save the call recording on my phone. California's a 2-party consent state, but Derek had conveniently forgotten to mention he was recording calls when his voicemail system picked up, a little detail I'd noticed months ago when I heard the telltale beep. Thursday brought an unexpected complication. I was reviewing property law cases in a campus library when my phone buzzed with a text from my upstairs neighbor, Mrs. Patterson. Derek's here with some men in suits. They're taking pictures of your car and measuring the driveway. My stomach dropped. I packed up my books and raced home to find Derek standing in my driveway with 2 guys who looked like they'd stepped out of a real estate magazine. Clean suits, clipboards, one of them holding what looked like a surveyor's tool. Excuse me, I called out, walking up to the group. Can I help you with something? Derek's face lit up with that predatory smile I'd learned to hate. Just having the property appraised, tenant. Market analysis for after you're gone. He gestured to the shorter man with the clipboard. This is Jim Hendricks from Premier Properties, and that's his associate Mike. We're discussing the improvements I'll be making once I have vacant possession. The words hit me like ice water. Improvements. He wasn't just planning to re-rent my house, he was planning to flip it. All those times he'd complained about the outdated kitchen and inefficient heating system suddenly made sense. Derek thought he'd struck gold, an easy eviction followed by a quick renovation and sale. Market's hot right now, Jim was saying to Derek. House like this, in this neighborhood. You're looking at easy $300K profit after a basic kitchen and bath renovation. Maybe more if you convert that back bedroom into a master suite. My hands clenched into fists. Not only had Derek been illegally collecting my rent for almost a year, not only was he trying to evict me on bogus charges, he was actively planning to profit off what he thought was his property. The audacity was breathtaking. Of course, Derek continued, loud enough for me to clearly hear, I'll need to fumigate first. Place has been contaminated by college kids for too long. Probably need to replace the carpets, maybe the drywall in that back room where they've been having their little gatherings. That's when it hit me. Derek wasn't just trying to evict me, he was setting up an insurance fraud scheme. Claim damage that didn't exist, inflate the renovation costs, pocket the difference. I pulled out my phone and started recording. Interesting, I said, stepping closer. And you're planning to start these renovations when exactly? Derek's eyes narrowed as he caught the deliberate tone in my voice. Soon as you're out, college boy. Why, you thinking of making this easier on everyone and leaving early? I kept my phone recording, angling it to catch the whole conversation. Just curious about the timeline. 30 days seems pretty aggressive for someone who's been such a attentive property manager. Jim from Premier Properties cleared his throat awkwardly. Actually, Derek, we should probably discuss the renovation budget before. Later, Derek cut him off, his attention fully focused on me now. There was something predatory in his stance, like he could smell my desperation. Right now I want to make sure our soon-to-be former tenant understands his situation. He stepped closer, close enough that I could smell the cheap cologne he always doused himself with. See, I've been documenting everything. Every noise complaint from the neighbors, every time you violated parking rules, every little infraction. You think you can just lawyer up and fight this? I've got 2 years of evidence showing what a problem tenant you've been. Evidence? I kept my voice level. What kind of evidence? Derek's smile turned cruel. Photos, recordings, witness statements. Mrs. Patterson upstairs has been very helpful. He gestured toward her window. Turns out she's been keeping track of every time your little study groups went past quiet hours. Every time you had unauthorized guests. Every parking violation. My blood ran cold. Mrs. Patterson had always seemed friendly, even sympathetic. The thought that she'd been feeding information to Derek this whole time felt like a betrayal. But then I noticed something. Her curtains were drawn tight, and there was no car in her usual parking spot. She'd texted me about Derek being here, but where was she? Mrs. Patterson's been very cooperative, Derek continued. Amazing how much people notice when you actually ask them to pay attention. 2 years of documentation should be more than enough for any housing court judge. Mike, the second appraiser, was looking increasingly uncomfortable. Derek, maybe we should wrap up the measurements, Anne. We're not done here. Derek's voice had taken on an edge I'd never heard before. I want to make sure college boy here understands that fighting this eviction isn't just futile, it's going to be expensive. Legal fees, court costs, and when he loses, he'll be responsible for my legal fees too. The threat was clear, and suddenly I realized Derek wasn't just a petty tyrant, he was experienced at this. The confidence, the prepared documentation, the coordinated approach with the appraisers. This wasn't his first time steamrolling a tenant. How many people have you done this to? The question slipped out before I could stop myself. Derek's grin widened. Smart question. Let's just say I've learned a lot about tenant management over the years. Amazing how many renters think they have rights they don't actually have. Amazing how many judges side with property owners who come prepared. Jim was actively backing toward his car now. Derek, we really should. The previous tenant learned that lesson the hard way, Derek continued, ignoring his appraiser completely. College girl, a lot like you actually. Thought she could fight an eviction over excessive noise. Ended up owing me $12,000 in legal fees when all was said and done. Had to drop out of school to pay it off. My stomach turned. This was a pattern. Derek was systematically targeting student renters, probably banking on them being too inexperienced or financially strapped to fight back effectively. The casual way he mentioned ruining someone's education made me physically sick. But it also made me angrier than I'd ever been in my life. 12,000, I repeated slowly. That's quite a business model you've got there. Derek shrugged. Property management is about managing problems. Sometimes problems require expensive solutions. That's when I decided the attorney's advice about letting Derek hang himself had served its purpose. I pulled my phone closer, making sure the recording was crystal clear. You know what, Derek? I think you're right about documentation being important. His eyebrows shot up. Finally coming to your senses. Oh, absolutely. In fact, I've been doing some documenting of my own. I scrolled through my phone with deliberate slowness. Like this recording of you just admitting to systematically targeting student tenants. And threatening me with $12,000 in legal fees. That's some fascinating stuff right there. Derek's face went from smug to cautious in about 2 seconds. Recording without consent is illegal in California, college boy. You're absolutely right, I said cheerfully. Good thing I learned that from your own voicemail system. You know, the one that records calls without telling people. Amazing what you can pick up when you actually pay attention to detail. The color drained from Derek's face, but before he could respond, my phone started buzzing. Unknown number. I almost declined, then noticed it was a local area code. Excuse me 1 second, I said, answering the call. Hello. Is this the tenant at 1247 Maple Street? The voice was crisp, professional. Speaking. This is Jennifer Walsh from the Department of Consumer Affairs, Housing Investigation Unit. We've received some concerning reports about irregular rent collection at your address. Would you be available for a brief conversation? I looked at Derek, whose face had gone from pale to ashen. Jim and Mike were already halfway to their car. Actually, I said into the phone, this is perfect timing. The person you're probably looking for is standing right here. Would you like to speak with Derek Morrison? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. What, who reported? Sir. The voice on the phone continued. We've been investigating reports that rent has been collected on this property without proper authorization from the legal owner. Are you the tenant? I am, I said, watching Derek's panic escalate. And Mr. Morrison just told me some very interesting things about his business practices. He's right here if you'd like to speak with him. That would be helpful. However, I should inform you that we've also received a complaint about an improper eviction notice issued at this address. Are you familiar with that situation? Derek made a desperate grab for my phone. Give me that. I stepped back smoothly. Very familiar. In fact, I have the notice right here, along with some recordings that might interest you. Recordings? Derek's voice cracked. Sir, the investigator continued, I'm going to need to schedule a formal interview with both you and the person claiming to be the landlord. This is a serious matter involving potential fraud and illegal collection of rent. Derek was backing toward the street now, his earlier confidence completely evaporated. This is insane. I'm the property manager. I have every right. Property manager. I interrupted. That's interesting. When exactly did Mrs. Chen's estate authorize you to continue collecting rent after she died? The silence was deafening. Jim and Mike had reached their car and were actively driving away. Derek stood alone in the driveway, looking like he'd seen a ghost. "Sir." The investigator's voice came through my phone speaker. "Are you still there?" "Still here." And I think Mr. Morrison was just about to explain his authorization to collect rent on a property he doesn't own. Derek's face went through several colors before settling on a sickly green. The estate, there was an understanding. An understanding? I kept my voice level. What kind of understanding? We need to. I have to call my lawyer. Derek fumbled for his own phone with shaking hands. "Excellent idea," I said. "You're definitely going to need one." The investigator's voice cut through Derek's panic like a knife. "Sir, I'm going to need both parties to remain at the property. I'm dispatching an officer to take statements and secure any relevant documents." Derek's phone slipped from his trembling hands and clattered on the concrete. "An officer? This is just a civil matter. Fraud and illegal rent collection are criminal matters, Mr. Morrison." I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. "But don't worry, I'm sure it's all just a misunderstanding." That's when Derek surprised me. Instead of continuing to panic, his face suddenly hardened into something cold and calculating. He bent down, picked up his phone, and straightened up with a look I'd never seen before, pure malice. "You know what, college boy? You want to play games?" His voice had dropped to a whisper that somehow felt more threatening than all his previous shouting. "Fine. Let's play." He started dialing while staring directly at me. "Yeah, it's Derek. I need you to file the emergency restraining order we discussed." "Yes, today. The tenant has become violent and threatening." My stomach dropped. "What are you talking about? I haven't touched you." Derek held up one finger, continuing his call. "He's been recording me without consent, making threats about legal action, and just now he attempted to physically assault me when I tried to stop him from filming." "Yes, I have witnesses." He was lying through his teeth, but the casual way he did it told me everything I needed to know. This wasn't desperation, this was experience. Derek had played this game before, and he was better at it than I'd realized. "Derek, there's no one here who," I started, but then I saw Mrs. Patterson's curtain twitch upstairs. My blood ran cold. She wasn't gone. She was watching. And if Derek had been paying her for information about me for 2 years. Mrs. Patterson saw the whole thing. Derek continued into his phone, following my gaze. Tenant grabbed my arm when I tried to leave, made threats about ruining my business. I'm genuinely concerned for my safety. The investigator's voice crackled through my phone speaker. "Sir, what's happening there?" I'm hearing raised voices. Derek smiled at me, actually smiled, while he continued his call. "I need that restraining order filed within the hour. And call Judge Martinez's clerk. If the tenant is being violent, we might be able to expedite the eviction hearing." My mind raced. A restraining order would make me look like the aggressor. If he had Mrs. Patterson willing to lie for him, and if he could get in front of a judge first with his version of events. "This is insane," I said into my phone, loud enough for the investigator to hear. "He's fabricating a story about violence that never happened." "Both parties need to remain calm," the investigator responded. "The officer will be there in 10 minutes to sort this out." But Derek wasn't done. He ended his call and immediately started another one. Channel 7 News. "This is Derek Morrison. I've got a story for you about student housing fraud." "Yes, fraud. I'm a property manager being threatened and harassed by a tenant who's been illegally recording private conversations." My heart pounded. He was going public. Not just legal action, public humiliation. Even if I eventually proved I owned the house, if this hit the news first with his spin on it. "Mr. Morrison," I said carefully, "I think you're making a mistake." "The only mistake," he replied, covering his phone, "was not dealing with you sooner. You want to destroy my business. Fine. But I'm taking you down with me." He returned to his call. "The tenant claims to have evidence of wrongdoing, but he obtained it illegally. This is clearly a desperate attempt to avoid eviction by manufacturing a scandal." I looked up at Mrs. Patterson's window again. The curtain was open now, and I could see her watching intently. If she was willing to lie about seeing me assault Derek, this could spiral out of control fast. Then my phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. "Don't panic. This is Mrs. Patterson. I'm not helping him. Never was. Check your email. Eleanor." I blinked at the message, then quickly opened my email. There was a message from eleanor47@gmail.com with the subject line, "Derek's insurance problem." Inside was a photo of Derek's car with a clearly visible crack across the windshield, timestamped from this morning. Below it was a message. "He's been telling his insurance company that student parties cause property damage he's been creating himself. I've been documenting everything. He doesn't know I know what he's really doing." My hands started shaking, but this time it was from excitement, not fear. Mrs. Patterson hadn't been helping Derek, she'd been investigating him. Derek was still on his call with the news station, spinning his story about being victimized by a dangerous tenant, completely unaware that his whole world was about to collapse. I looked back at my deed folder sitting safely inside the house, then at Derek making himself a bigger liar with every word he spoke to the reporter. 10 minutes until the police arrived. Derek thought he was cornering me, but he'd just made the biggest mistake of his career. Time to let him finish hanging himself. I decided to let Derek keep digging his hole while I gathered my ammunition. As he continued his dramatic phone call with the news station, painting himself as the victim of a dangerous tenant, I quietly forwarded Mrs. Patterson's email to the housing investigator along with a quick message, "Additional evidence of fraud scheme attached. Witness upstairs has been documenting everything." Derek was really getting into his performance now. "This tenant has been systematically trying to damage my reputation because he knows he's about to be legally evicted," he told the reporter. "He's recorded private conversations, made threats, and now he's become physically aggressive. This is exactly why landlords need stronger protections." My phone buzzed again. Another text from Mrs. Patterson. "He's about to claim I witnessed the assault. Play along for now. I have something that will end this." Derek ended his call and turned back to me with renewed confidence. "Channel 7 will be here in 20 minutes. Hope you're ready to explain your harassment campaign on camera. Harassment campaign? I kept my voice steady. Derek, you do realize that everything you just told them can be fact-checked, right? Facts. He laughed. Mrs. Patterson saw you grab my arm. That's assault, college boy. And the illegal recordings? That's wiretapping. You just turned a simple eviction into a criminal matter. Right on cue, Mrs. Patterson's front door opened and she stepped onto the porch. She was a small woman in her 70s, but she carried herself with the authority of someone who'd spent decades as a high school principal before retiring. Derek, she called down, her voice carrying clearly across the yard. I think there's been a misunderstanding. Derek's face lit up. Mrs. Patterson. Perfect timing. Can you tell this young man what you witnessed? She made her way slowly down the stairs, each step deliberate. Oh, I witnessed quite a lot, Derek. Quite a lot indeed. Something in her tone made Derek's smile falter slightly, but he pressed on. You saw him grab my arm when I tried to walk away, didn't you? And the threatening language he used? Mrs. Patterson reached the bottom of the stairs and walked over to where we stood. She was carrying a manila envelope that she clutched protectively against her chest. I saw a man telling lies to reporters, she said calmly. I heard someone threatening a young tenant who's been nothing but respectful for 2 years. And I watched someone claim ownership of property that isn't his. Derek's face went white. Mrs. Patterson, I think you're confused. I'm 73 years old, Derek, not senile. Her voice could have cut glass. I've been watching you for months, ever since you started your little scheme. Did you really think no one would notice? What scheme? I'm the property manager. You were fired 8 months ago. Mrs. Patterson's words hit like a physical blow. Sarah Chin called me personally to let me know. She wanted to make sure I knew who to contact for maintenance issues, since you were no longer authorized to enter the property. Derek stumbled backward like he'd been slapped. You're mistaken. I have the email. Mrs. Patterson patted her envelope. Dated March 15th, please be aware that Derek Morrison is no longer managing the property at 1247 Maple Street. Do not allow him access to the building or grounds. I stared at her, then at Derek, my mind reeling. He'd been fired 8 months ago. That meant he'd been collecting my rent illegally for even longer than I'd thought. You've been stealing my rent for 8 months. The words came out as a whisper. Derek's mouth opened and closed, but no sound came out. In the distance, I could hear sirens approaching. Oh, it gets better, Mrs. Patterson continued. Derek, would you like to explain to everyone what really happened to that college girl you mentioned? The one who supposedly owed you $12,000. Derek's face had gone from white to gray. How do you? Jennifer Walsh. Sweet girl, engineering student. You tried the same scam on her that you're running now. Mrs. Patterson's voice was deadly calm. Except she had something you didn't count on. What? I asked, completely captivated by this revelation. Mrs. Patterson smiled grimly. A father who's a federal prosecutor. Derek made a strangled noise and started backing toward the street, but Mrs. Patterson wasn't finished. Jennifer's case is what triggered the Department of Consumer Affairs investigation, Derek. You didn't just pick the wrong target, you picked the prosecutor's daughter. The sirens were getting closer, and I could see Derek calculating whether he could make it to his car before the police arrived. But Mrs. Patterson pulled out her phone with surprising speed. I wouldn't recommend running, she said pleasantly. I've been live streaming this entire conversation to Jennifer's father. He's been watching everything. Derek's legs gave out, and he sat down hard on the driveway. That's when I realized Mrs. Patterson had just handed me the perfect moment. Derek, I said, pulling out my own manila folder, before the police get here, there's something I really need to show you. I pulled the deed from my folder, but before I could say another word, Derek's phone started ringing. He looked at it with the expression of a man watching his own execution, then answered with a shaking hand. Hello. His voice cracked. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but Derek's face went through a spectrum of colors that would have been comedic if the situation weren't so serious. No, sir, I can explain. Yes, I understand you're Jennifer's father, but... What do you mean federal charges? Derek's voice rose to almost a squeak. This is just a civil matter between me and a tenant who... Mrs. Patterson leaned over and spoke loud enough for the phone to pick up. He just threatened the young man with $12,000 in legal fees, just like he did to your daughter. Derek frantically gestured for her to be quiet, but the damage was done. Even from 3 feet away, I could hear angry shouting coming through his phone speaker. Sir, please, if we could just discuss this reasonably. Derek was practically begging now. I never actually filed charges against Jennifer, and this situation is completely different. The shouting got louder. Derek held the phone away from his ear, wincing. What's a federal prosecutor so angry about? I asked Mrs. Patterson innocently. Wire fraud, she replied cheerfully. Apparently, Derek's been using electronic banking to collect rent on properties he doesn't manage. When you do that across state lines, which he did with 3 properties in Nevada, it becomes a federal crime. Derek's face went green. Nevada? How do you know about Nevada? Mrs. Patterson's smile was absolutely predatory. Because Jennifer's father is very thorough. Amazing what you can uncover when you have federal resources and a personal vendetta. That's when the police cars pulled up, not 1, but 3 of them. Derek ended his call and scrambled to his feet, smoothing down his shirt like that would somehow restore his authority. Officers, he called out as they approached. Thank God you're here. This tenant has been threatening me and... Mr. Morrison. The lead officer, a tall woman with sergeant stripes, cut him off. I'm Sergeant Martinez. We need to speak with you about some irregularities in rent collection at this address. Derek's confident facade crumbled instantly. Irregularities? I'm just here doing a property inspection. Sir, we have reports that you've been collecting rent without authorization from the property owner. Sergeant Martinez pulled out a notepad. Can you provide documentation of your current management contract? Derek's mouth opened and closed like a fish. The contract, it's at my office. Mr. Morrison was fired 8 months ago, Mrs. Patterson interjected, pulling a printed email from her envelope. I have the termination notice right here. Sergeant Martinez took the paper and read it quickly. Mr. Morrison, this document clearly states that your management contract was terminated in March. It's now November. Can you explain why you issued an eviction notice yesterday? There was a misunderstanding about the termination, the estate was in transition. Derek was grasping at straws. Actually, I said, stepping forward with my deed, I think I can clear up the confusion. But before I could show the document, another car pulled up, a black sedan with government plates. A man in a sharp suit got out, and even Derek seemed to recognize him. Federal Prosecutor James Walsh, the man announced, showing his badge. I believe you've been expecting me, Mr. Morrison. Derek's knees actually buckled. Mr. Walsh. I can explain everything, your daughter and I had a simple misunderstanding. My daughter? Walsh's voice was ice cold. Mr. Morrison, my daughter dropped out of engineering school because of your misunderstanding. She's working double shifts at a coffee shop to pay off the legal fees you extorted from her. I never actually took her to court. No, you just threatened her with financial ruin until she paid you to avoid it. Walsh stepped closer. That's called extortion, Mr. Morrison. And when you did it using electronic communications and banking, it became my jurisdiction. Derek looked around desperately, at the police, at the prosecutor, at Mrs. Patterson's triumphant face, and finally at me still holding my deed. This is insane, he burst out. I'm the victim here. This tenant has been recording me illegally, threatening my business, and now he's conspiring with all of you to. To what, Derek? I finally spoke up. To expose the fact that you've been stealing rent money for 8 months. Stealing. Derek's voice cracked. I'm the property manager. Mrs. Patterson corrected. Past tense. Prosecutor Walsh pulled out his own folder. Mr. Morrison, I have evidence of similar schemes involving properties in Nevada, Arizona, and Oregon. You've been running this scam for over 2 years. Derek's legs finally gave out completely. He sat down hard on the concrete again, his head in his hands. This can't be happening, he mumbled. This was supposed to be simple. That's when I realized the true scope of what we'd uncovered. This wasn't just about my house or even Jennifer Walsh. Derek had been systematically targeting student renters across multiple states, using the same playbook, illegal evictions, fabricated damages, and threats of financial ruin. And now, thanks to Mrs. Patterson's detective work and a federal prosecutor with a personal vendetta, his entire operation was crashing down. I looked at the deed in my hands and smiled. Derek still had no idea about my trump card. But before I could reveal my ownership, Derek's phone rang again. He looked at the caller ID and his face somehow managed to go even paler. Channel 7, he whispered, then answered with fake confidence. Hello. Yes, this is Derek Morrison. I watched in fascination as his expression shifted from panic to confusion to absolute horror in the span of 30 seconds. What do you mean you've been investigating me for 6 months? His voice cracked. I just called you an hour ago about a tenant issue. Prosecutor Walsh leaned over to Sergeant Martinez. Channel 7 has been building a story about rental fraud targeting students. Morrison just handed them the missing piece. Derek was frantically trying to backpedal with the reporter. No, you don't understand. I'm the victim here. This tenant has been, he stopped mid-sentence, listening. What do you mean other victims have come forward? Mrs. Patterson chuckled beside me. I may have made a few phone calls to some of Derek's former tenants. Amazing how many people are willing to talk when they find out they're not alone. Derek ended the call and immediately started dialing another number. I need to call my lawyer. This is all a setup. Actually, Derek, I interrupted, your lawyer might be busy. Didn't you say you were filing an emergency restraining order against me? He froze. I was protecting myself. From what? Me standing in my own driveway. I let that hang in the air for a moment. You told your lawyer I assaulted you, right? That's going to be interesting when the news cameras show up and find out you lied. Derek's phone buzzed with a text. He read it and his face went white. My lawyer just fired me. Smart lawyer, Prosecutor Walsh commented dryly. But Derek wasn't done fighting. Suddenly, his panic shifted into something more dangerous, desperation with nothing left to lose. You know what? He stood up, pointing at me. Fine. You want to destroy my life. Let's see how you handle having your student housing application flagged for fraud. Let's see how your graduate program feels about criminal investigations. Sergeant Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, that sounds like a threat. It's not a threat, it's a promise. Derek's voice had taken on a manic edge. I have contacts in every housing office in the county. This kid will never rent again. I'll make sure of that. Derek, Mrs. Patterson said quietly, you might want to reconsider that approach. Why? What's he going to do? Sue me. I'll be in federal prison anyway, apparently. Derek laughed bitterly. Might as well take him down with me. He pulled out his phone again and started dialing. Yeah, it's Derek Morrison. I need you to blacklist a tenant. Names, he looked at me expectantly. I realized he'd been harassing me for 2 years and didn't even know my full legal name. The absurdity was stunning. You know what, Derek? I said, finally pulling the deed completely out of my folder. Before you make that call, there's something I really think you should see. Derek barely glanced at the paper in my hands. I don't care about your lease agreement or whatever pathetic legal advice you think you've gotten. It's not a lease agreement. Then what? Derek stopped mid-dial, something in my tone finally penetrating his panic. Prosecutor Walsh stepped closer, clearly curious. Mrs. Patterson was practically vibrating with anticipation. Even the officers had stopped taking notes to watch. Derek slowly lowered his phone. What is that? I held up the deed so everyone could see it clearly. It's the property deed for 1247 Maple Street. Dated August 15th, filed with the county recorder's office 3 months ago. Derek blinked. Property deed? Why do you have someone else's? Then it hit him. I watched the realization dawn across his face like a sunrise, starting with confusion, moving through disbelief, and landing squarely on absolute horror. No, he whispered. That's impossible. Derek Morrison, I said formally, meet your new landlord. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek stared at the deed like it was written in a foreign language, his mouth moving but no sound coming out. You can't, that's not. He stammered. Sarah Chin sold it to me in August. Cash sale. Quick closing. I couldn't keep the satisfaction out of my voice. Congratulations, Derek. You've been trying to evict your own boss. Derek's phone slipped from his hands and shattered on the concrete. Derek stared at the deed like it might spontaneously combust if he looked at it hard enough. The silence stretched on until Prosecutor Walsh cleared his throat. So let me understand this correctly, Walsh said, his voice carrying the precision of a man who'd spent years dismantling lies in courtrooms. Mr. Morrison has been collecting rent on a property he doesn't manage, from someone who actually owns it, while simultaneously trying to evict his own landlord. That's impossible, Derek whispered, but his voice lacked any real conviction. The estate never. Sarah never mentioned. Why would she mention it to someone she'd already fired? Mrs. Patterson asked sweetly. You weren't exactly on her Christmas card list after she found out about your unauthorized rent collection. Derek's face cycled through several shades of red before settling on a mottled purple. This is a setup. You're all working together to frame me. Frame you for what, exactly? I asked, genuinely curious about his logic. For cashing rent checks that I voluntarily gave you. Checks that I have copies of, by the way. Every single one for the past 8 months. That's when Derek's survival instincts finally kicked in, and instead of backing down, he doubled down in the worst possible way. Fraud, he shouted, pointing at me with a shaking finger. You committed fraud. You knew I was the property manager and you deliberately deceived me about. He trailed off, clearly realizing his argument made no sense. About what? Sergeant Martinez prompted, pen poised over her notepad. He knew I didn't know he owned the property, and he didn't tell me. Derek's voice rose to almost a shriek. That's fraud by omission. The silence that followed was broken by Prosecutor Walsh's snort of laughter. Mr. Morrison, are you seriously arguing that a property owner is legally obligated to inform a trespasser that they're trespassing? I'm not a trespasser. I'm the property manager. You were fired 8 months ago, Mrs. Patterson reminded him patiently. The termination wasn't valid. There were procedures that weren't followed. Derek was spiraling, but instead of just watching him self-destruct, I realized he was about to create an even bigger problem. His phone was shattered, but he was patting his pockets frantically, clearly looking for another way to contact someone. Derek, I said carefully, what procedures are you talking about? The management company has protocols. You can't just fire a property manager without proper documentation and transition procedures. He found what he was looking for, a small tablet in his jacket pocket. I need to call my supervisor. My stomach dropped. If Derek worked for an actual property management company, this could get exponentially more complicated. A legitimate business might have insurance, lawyers, and procedures for handling situations like this. Even if Derek had been acting outside his authority, a company backing him could turn this into a protracted legal nightmare. Your supervisor at Morrison Property Management? Mrs. Patterson asked innocently. The company that's been operating without a business license for 14 months. Derek froze with the tablet halfway to his ear. What? Oh, Derek, did you forget to renew your business license? Or pay your professional liability insurance? Or file your quarterly tax reports? Mrs. Patterson pulled another sheet from her seemingly endless envelope. I may have done a little research into your business practices. Prosecutor Walsh stepped closer to read over her shoulder. Unlicensed property management, uninsured business operations, tax evasion. Mr. Morrison, you've built quite a house of cards here. But Derek surprised me again. Instead of collapsing further, he suddenly straightened up with a look of desperate cunning. You want to play hardball, he said, his voice taking on a dangerous edge. Fine. I may be going down, but I'm taking everyone with me. He started tapping on his tablet with frantic energy. Channel 7 isn't the only media contact I have. Let's see how the university feels when every news outlet in the state starts asking questions about graduate students buying houses with mysterious cash while living on student stipends. My blood ran cold. Derek was threatening to turn my legitimate home purchase into a scandal about financial impropriety. Even if the accusations were baseless, the investigation alone could derail my academic career. Where exactly does a graduate student get cash for a house? Derek continued, his voice getting stronger as he sensed he'd found a weapon. Maybe we should ask some questions about research grant fraud. He was fabricating accusations out of thin air, but in the court of public opinion, questions could be just as damaging as answers. And if he could make enough noise, the university might feel pressure to investigate me just to protect their own reputation. Prosecutor Walsh looked at me with new interest. How did you finance the purchase? That's when I realized Derek had just made his final, fatal mistake. I looked Derek straight in the eye as I answered Prosecutor Walsh's question. Student loans, savings from my research assistantship, and an inheritance from my grandmother. All completely true and easily verifiable. I can provide documentation for every dollar if needed. But Derek wasn't listening to my response. He was too busy typing furiously on his tablet, and I could see the manic gleam in his eyes getting brighter. Posted to 3 housing forums and sent to 4 news outlets, he announced with satisfaction. Let's see how long your graduate program keeps you once they start getting calls about their student allegedly laundering money through real estate purchases. Derek, Mrs. Patterson said sharply, you might want to think about what you just did. What I just did was level the playing field, Derek shot back. If I'm going down for rent collection, he can go down for fraud. Sergeant Martinez stepped forward. Mr. Morrison, did you just admit to filing false reports about this young man? They're not false. They're questions that need to be answered. Derek's voice was getting higher and more desperate. How does a student afford a house? Where did the money really come from? From sources I just explained, I said evenly, though inside I was calculating how much damage Derek's social media blitz could do before the truth caught up. Academic institutions were notoriously paranoid about financial scandals. Derek smiled triumphantly. Explanations are easy. Documentation is harder. And while you're spending the next 6 months proving your innocence, your reputation will be destroyed. That's when Prosecutor Walsh pulled out his own phone. Sergeant Martinez, I think we need to add criminal defamation and harassment to Mr. Morrison's charges. Criminal defamation. Derek's confidence wavered slightly. Knowingly publishing false statements designed to damage someone's reputation and career, Walsh explained calmly. It's a felony when done with malicious intent. Which you just confessed to. Derek's tablet slipped in his sweaty hands. Those weren't false statements. They were legitimate questions about suspicious financial activity. Based on what evidence? Walsh pressed. You've admitted you didn't know he owned the property. You've admitted you don't know his actual name. You have no knowledge of his finances whatsoever. So what exactly made the activity suspicious other than your desire for revenge? I watched Derek realize he just painted himself into another corner. Every word out of his mouth was making his legal situation worse, but he couldn't seem to stop talking. He set me up. Derek burst out. He deliberately let me believe I was the landlord so he could humiliate me. He let you believe something that was never true, Mrs. Patterson corrected. You believed you were the landlord because you were stealing from him. I wasn't stealing. I was collecting legitimate rent. From property you'd been fired for managing 8 months ago, Sergeant Martinez added to her notes. Derek spun around wildly, looking for someone, anyone, who might support his version of events. His gaze landed on the house behind us, then suddenly lit up with desperate inspiration. The lease, he shouted. I have a signed lease agreement. That proves I had authority to collect rent. My stomach dropped. I'd never thought about the lease I'd signed 2 years ago. Technically, Derek was right, there was a signed document giving him authority to collect rent. If that lease was still legally valid. Derek, I said carefully, what lease are you talking about? He was already pulling out his keys, heading toward the house. The original rental agreement. It's in the property files I keep in the basement storage unit. You keep files in my basement? I couldn't hide my shock. Not your basement, Derek said with returning confidence. The property's basement. Files that prove my authority to manage this house. He was at my front door now, key extended. 2 years of legitimate property management documentation. Prosecutor Walsh caught my eye. Do you want to press charges for breaking and entering? But before I could answer, Derek's key hit the lock and stopped. He tried again, jiggling it frantically. What, why isn't? Mrs. Patterson's voice carried clearly across the yard. Sarah had the locks changed when she fired you, Derek. That was in the email too. Derek stared at the key in his hand like it had personally betrayed him. Then he looked at the door, at all of us watching him, and finally at me. You changed my locks, he said quietly. I changed my locks, I corrected. When I bought my house. That's when Derek snapped completely. You want to see the lease? Derek's voice had taken on a manic quality that made everyone take a step back. Fine. I'll get the lease. Before anyone could react, he picked up a decorative rock from my garden and was hefting it toward my front window. Derek, stop. Sergeant Martinez commanded, but he was already in motion. The rock shattered the glass with a sound like an explosion. Derek reached through the jagged opening, unlocked the door, and pushed it open. Breaking and entering, Walsh said grimly into his phone. We need backup units. But Derek was already inside my house, shouting from somewhere in the interior. Property management files. Basement storage. I'll prove I had authority. I started toward the broken window, but Sergeant Martinez held up a hand. Let us handle this, sir. He's clearly unstable. From inside came the sound of Derek throwing things around, doors slamming, and increasingly frantic cursing. Where are the files? There should be files. Mrs. Patterson leaned closer to me. There are no files, she whispered. Derek never kept proper records. That's part of what Sarah fired him for. Then what's he looking for? I whispered back. Anything he can claim proves he belonged here. The sounds from inside were getting more violent, furniture scraping, what sounded like drawers being yanked out and dumped. Then Derek's voice rose to a roar. Where is everything? Where are my property management records? Sergeant Martinez was coordinating with the backup units on her radio when Derek appeared at my broken window, his face streaked with dust and his shirt torn. Someone cleaned out the files, he shouted. The basement storage unit is empty. Someone destroyed evidence. What evidence? Prosecutor Walsh called back. Property inspection reports. Maintenance logs. Tenant complaints. Derek was practically foaming at the mouth. 2 years of documentation proving this was my property to manage. Derek, I said as calmly as I could manage, I've never seen any property management files in this house. The basement has my Christmas decorations and some old textbooks. Liar. Derek disappeared back into the house, and we heard him stomping toward what sounded like the kitchen. I kept copies of everything. Maintenance requests, inspection photos, records of every violation. Mrs. Patterson looked troubled. He actually believes there were files. More crashing from inside, then Derek's voice again, the kitchen cabinet. I kept backup documents in the kitchen cabinet. I felt a chill. There was a locked cabinet in the kitchen that had been there when I moved in. I'd always assumed it was just an old spice cabinet and never bothered to open it. Oh no, Mrs. Patterson said quietly. What if he actually did hide documents in the house? The implications hit me immediately. If Derek had been keeping fake property management records in my house for 2 years, he could claim they proved his authority. Even if they were fabricated, their existence alone would complicate everything. Found it. Derek's triumphant shout echoed from the kitchen. Key was taped under the drawer. Property management files, exactly where I left them. Prosecutor Walsh was already moving toward the house. If he's been storing false documents on your property. That's tampering with evidence, Sergeant Martinez finished. But Derek wasn't done. 2 years of tenant violation reports, he called out, and I could hear papers rustling. Noise complaints. Unauthorized guests. Property damage documentation. My heart sank. Derek had been building a case against me for 2 years, storing fake evidence in my own house. Even if the documents were completely fabricated, their existence would muddy the legal waters considerably. Photo evidence. Derek's voice was getting more excited. Dates, timestamps, documented proof of lease violations. He appeared at the window again, clutching a manila folder thick with papers. Let's see you explain this, college boy. But as Derek waved the folder triumphantly, something fell out, a single photograph that fluttered to the ground near Mrs. Patterson's feet. She picked it up, looked at it, and started laughing. Derek, she called out sweetly, you might want to check the date on this evidence. Mrs. Patterson held up the photograph so we could all see it. According to this timestamp, Derek documented excessive noise from unauthorized parties on September 15, 2022. Derek's triumphant expression faltered. So. That proves. Derek, I interrupted, staring at the photo in disbelief. I wasn't even living here in September 2022. I didn't move in until January 2023. The silence that followed was deafening. Derek looked at the photo, then at me, then back at the photo. His mouth opened and closed several times before any sound came out. That's impossible. You've been here for 2 years. 14 months, Sergeant Martinez corrected, checking her notes. The lease application we pulled shows a January 2023 start date. Derek scrambled through his folder with increasing desperation. No. There are photos from 2021. Documentation going back to when a tenant first moved in. Which tenant would that be? Mrs. Patterson asked innocently. Because the young lady who lived here before was named Jessica Martinez. She moved out in December 2022. Prosecutor Walsh stepped closer to examine the scattered papers. Mr. Morrison, are you saying you've been fabricating tenant violation reports for multiple tenants? I wasn't fabricating anything. I was documenting legitimate issues. But Derek's voice cracked on every word. The noise complaints were real. The property damage was real. According to your own photos, I said, pieces clicking together in my mind, I was apparently throwing loud parties 6 months before I even signed a lease here. Derek rifled through his papers frantically. There must be, the dates must be. He stopped suddenly, his face going pale as he stared at one particular document. What is it, Derek? Mrs. Patterson prompted. Derek's voice came out as a whisper, this complaint is dated for next month. The implications hit everyone simultaneously. Derek hadn't just been fabricating past violations, he'd been pre-writing future ones. The folder contained a carefully planned harassment campaign with complaints ready to file months in advance. Let me see that, Prosecutor Walsh demanded, stepping toward the broken window. Derek clutched the papers protectively against his chest. You don't understand. I had to stay ahead of potential issues. Property management is about prevention. Prevention of what? Sergeant Martinez asked. Problems that haven't happened yet. Students always cause problems. I was just being prepared. Derek's voice rose to a near shriek. You document everything before they can claim innocence. Prosecutor Walsh was taking photos of the scattered documents with his phone. Mr. Morrison, you've just confessed to conspiracy to file false reports. That's when Derek made another catastrophic decision. Instead of stopping while he was already buried, he doubled down yet again. False reports. He laughed with manic energy. You want to see false reports? I'll show you false reports. He disappeared back into my kitchen, and we heard him yanking open more drawers. I've got documentation on half the rental properties in this neighborhood. Students who think they can get away with anything. Mrs. Patterson grabbed my arm. He's been doing this to other people. The sounds from inside escalated. Derek was clearly tearing apart my kitchen looking for more hidden document stashes. Noise violations. Property damage. Unauthorized modifications. Multiple properties, Walsh said grimly into his phone. This is bigger than we thought. Derek's voice echoed from what sounded like my bedroom now. I've got files on every problem tenant in the area. Evidence that will hold up in any court. Evidence you created before the violations occurred. Sergeant Martinez called out. Evidence that prevents violations from escalating. Derek shot back. Proactive property management. That's when I heard the sound that made my blood run cold, Derek opening what had to be my bedroom closet, where I kept my most important documents. Including backup copies of the house purchase paperwork. Derek, I called out urgently, get away from my personal property. Personal property. His laugh was unhinged. Everything in this house is documented evidence. Property management files stored on-site for legitimate business purposes. Prosecutor Walsh was already coordinating with the backup units. We need to get him out of there before he destroys actual evidence or plants more fake documents. But Derek wasn't done. His voice carried from deep inside the house. You want to know the truth? I've been protecting this neighborhood from problem tenants for years. Every complaint, every violation, every eviction, all justified. By falsified evidence dated before people even lived here. I shouted back. By thorough documentation of predictable patterns. Derek's voice was getting more distant, like he was moving toward the back of the house. Students are all the same. Same violations, same excuses, same denials. Mrs. Patterson looked at me with genuine concern. He really believes he was in the right. That's what makes him dangerous, Walsh replied. Complete conviction in a completely fabricated reality. The sounds from inside suddenly stopped. After Derek's manic energy, the silence was ominous. Derek? Sergeant Martinez called out. Mr. Morrison, please return to the front of the house. No response. Derek. I tried. What are you doing back there? When he finally answered, his voice carried a tone that made everyone tense. I found something very interesting in your bedroom closet. My stomach dropped. There were only two things in that closet that Derek might find interesting, my backup deed documents, or my laptop with all my graduate research. Derek, those are my personal files. Personal files that prove everything. His voice was getting closer again. You want to know how a graduate student affords a house? Let me read you some very interesting financial documents. He was coming back with my laptop. And if Derek had access to my banking records, my student loan information, my research files, he could twist anything into evidence of wrongdoing. I looked at Prosecutor Walsh, who was already signaling for the tactical units to move in. Derek was about to get very dangerous with very private information. Derek emerged from my house clutching my laptop like it was the Holy Grail, his eyes wild with the fervor of someone who thought he'd found the smoking gun that would vindicate everything. Financial records, he announced triumphantly, waving the computer above his head. Bank transfers. Loan applications. Let's see how clean your money really is. My heart hammered against my ribs. That laptop contained everything, my thesis research, personal banking information, private emails with Sarah about the house purchase, and worst of all, my grandmother's inheritance documentation that Derek could easily misinterpret or twist into something sinister. Derek, that's my personal computer, I said, trying to keep my voice level. You can't just. Can't what? Investigate suspicious financial activity? He was already trying to open it, stabbing at the keyboard with shaking fingers. Public has a right to know how graduate students suddenly afford $100,000 houses. Prosecutor Walsh stepped forward with deadly calm. Mr. Morrison, accessing someone's computer without permission is a federal crime. So is money laundering. Derek shot back, still fumbling with my password screen. So is using student loan money for unauthorized purposes. Mrs. Patterson moved closer to me. Can he actually access anything without your password? That's not the point, I whispered back. If he starts making public claims about what he thinks he found, even being wrong won't stop the damage. Derek had given up trying to guess my password and was now holding the laptop up like evidence at a trial. This machine contains proof of financial fraud. I demand a forensic examination. You demand. Sergeant Martinez's voice carried enough authority to stop a charging bull. Sir, you've already committed breaking and entering, destruction of property, and theft. Put down the computer and step away from the house. But Derek was too far gone for reason. I'm not stealing anything. I'm preserving evidence. He clutched my laptop tighter. This machine proves everything I've been saying about fraudulent student housing schemes. That's when my phone buzzed with a text that made my blood freeze. Channel 7 news van just turned onto your street. ETA 2 minutes. Eleanor. Derek must have seen my face change because he spun around and spotted the approaching news van at the same time I did. His manic grin returned full force. Perfect timing, he shouted toward the van. I've got the evidence right here. Prosecutor Walsh grabbed his radio. We need those backup units now. This is about to become a media circus. Derek was already walking toward the news van, my laptop held high like a trophy. Financial fraud. Illegal property schemes. It's all right here. I watched in horror as the Channel 7 reporter jumped out with her cameraman in tow. Even if they didn't broadcast Derek's wild accusations, the existence of the footage alone would be enough to start whisper campaigns that could destroy my academic career. Mr. Morrison, the reporter called out, clearly recognizing him from his earlier call. Do you have evidence of the housing fraud you reported? Derek practically glowed with vindication. Everything you need. Bank records. Suspicious transactions. Proof that graduate students are laundering money through real estate purchases. The camera was already rolling. Mrs. Patterson grabbed my arm urgently. You need to stop this, she whispered. Now. But Derek was in his element, playing to the camera like he was exposing the crime of the century. This laptop contains financial records that will blow this case wide open. That's when I realized Derek had just handed me the perfect opportunity to destroy him completely. On live television. I took a deep breath and walked directly toward the Channel 7 camera, my hand steady despite my racing heart. Derek was so busy basking in his moment of perceived triumph that he didn't notice me approaching until I was close enough to be clearly visible in the shot. Excuse me, I said to the reporter, my voice carrying clearly in the crisp November air. I think there's been a significant misunderstanding about what Mr. Morrison is claiming. Derek whipped around, clutching my laptop protectively. Don't listen to him. He's obviously going to lie about what's on here. The reporter looked between us with the sharp interest of someone who sensed a story getting more complicated. And you are? I'm the homeowner, I said simply, then pulled out my deed and held it up so the camera could see it clearly. The person Mr. Morrison has been trying to evict from a house I actually own. Derek's face went through several interesting color changes as the reporter's eyebrows shot toward her hairline. Homeowner. But Mr. Morrison said you were a tenant involved in financial fraud. Mr. Morrison was fired as property manager 8 months ago, I continued, my voice steady and factual. He's been illegally collecting rent from me since March while having no authority to manage the property. The camera swung back to Derek, whose mouth was opening and closing like a fish. The reporter stepped closer to him with predatory interest. Mr. Morrison, is it true you've been collecting rent without authorization? The situation is more complex than. Derek stammered, then suddenly rallied. He's trying to distract from the real issue. This laptop proves financial irregularities. What kind of irregularities? The reporter pressed. Derek's confidence wavered as he realized he actually had no idea what was on my computer. Suspicious transactions, large cash deposits that don't match a student's income. You mean my grandmother's inheritance? I asked innocently. The one that's fully documented with the probate court. Or my legitimate student loans that are a matter of public record through the university. The reporter was taking notes furiously. So Mr. Morrison, you're alleging financial fraud based on inheritance money and student loans? Derek's face was turning red. There has to be something suspicious. Graduate students don't just buy houses. Actually, Mrs. Patterson interjected, stepping into the camera frame, this young man saved for 2 years, received a family inheritance, and purchased the property in a legitimate sale with the original owner's estate. I have copies of all the documentation. Derek spun toward her frantically. Mrs. Patterson, you said you've been documenting his violations. I said I've been documenting everything, she corrected with steel in her voice. Including your illegal rent collection, your fabricated violation reports, and your threats against other tenants. The reporter's eyes lit up. This was clearly becoming a much bigger story than she'd expected. Fabricated reports. Mr. Morrison has been pre-writing tenant violation reports, Prosecutor Walsh said, stepping into view and showing his badge to the camera. We found documents in his possession claiming violations that occurred before tenants even moved in. Derek was backing away from the growing crowd, still clutching my laptop. This is all a setup. They're all working together to frame me. Frame you for what, exactly? The reporter asked, following him with the camera. For collecting rent you weren't authorized to collect. For doing my job. Derek's voice cracked. For protecting property values from problem tenants. By filing false police reports. Sergeant Martinez added, joining the group. By breaking into this young man's house. By stealing his personal computer. Derek looked around wildly, realizing he was surrounded by law enforcement, a prosecutor, witnesses, and a rolling news camera. His grip on my laptop tightened. I'm not stealing anything, he said desperately. I'm preserving evidence of crimes. The only crime here, I said clearly for the camera, is someone breaking into my house and stealing my property while trying to evict me from a home I legitimately own. Derek's last thread of composure snapped. Legitimately. You conspired with the estate to defraud me. Derek, I said with genuine bewilderment, how exactly does someone defraud a person by buying property they never owned? The silence that followed was broken only by the sound of additional police cars arriving and the hum of the news camera capturing Derek's complete meltdown on live television. Derek stood frozen in the middle of my driveway, my stolen laptop clutched against his chest, surrounded by police officers, a federal prosecutor, news cameras, and the smoking ruins of every lie he'd built his scam on. The November air was crisp enough that our breath made little clouds, but Derek was sweating like it was July. Mr. Morrison, the Channel 7 reporter said with the patience of someone who knew she was witnessing a career-making story, would you like to explain how someone can defraud a person by legally purchasing property? Derek's mouth moved silently for several seconds. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, he said, he should have told me. Told you what? Prosecutor Walsh asked. That he bought it. Derek's voice cracked. He should have told me he bought the house. The absurdity of it hung in the air like fog. Derek genuinely believed that I owed him an explanation for buying my own home. After 2 years of harassment, illegal rent collection, fabricated violations, and attempted eviction, his final defense was that I hadn't informed him of my purchase. Derek, I said gently, you were fired. You had no legal right to know anything about this property. But I was taking care of it, he said, his voice getting smaller. I was protecting it. Keeping the tenants in line. That has to count for something. Mrs. Patterson stepped forward with something that almost looked like sympathy. Derek, you weren't protecting anything. You were stealing rent money and terrorizing students. I never. Derek started, then stopped. The cameras were still rolling, and even in his broken state, some part of him realized that anything he said would be recorded forever. I was trying to do the right thing. The right thing, Sergeant Martinez said, pulling out handcuffs, would be returning this young man's computer and submitting to arrest. Derek looked down at my laptop like he'd forgotten he was holding it. Slowly, carefully, he set it on the ground and stepped away. Derek Morrison, Sergeant Martinez continued, you're under arrest for breaking and entering, theft, harassment, and collecting rent without authorization. As she read him his rights, Derek kept staring at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Not anger anymore, not even the manic desperation from before. Something closer to genuine confusion. I don't understand, he said as the handcuffs clicked shut. How did everything go so wrong? You got greedy, Prosecutor Walsh said simply. And you picked the wrong targets. The news crew followed Derek as he was loaded into the police car, the reporter already planning what would clearly be a multi-part investigation into rental fraud targeting students. Mrs. Patterson handed me my laptop, checking it for damage. Battery's probably dead, but it looks intact, she said. Derek was never particularly good with technology. I laughed despite everything. Mrs. Patterson, how long have you been investigating him? Since about a week after he started harassing you, she admitted. I spent 40 years dealing with bullies in high school. Couldn't stand watching him terrorize a nice young man who just wanted to study in peace. As Derek's police car disappeared down the street, I looked at my broken window, my deed, and my house. My house. After 2 years of Derek's petty tyranny, it felt surreal that it was finally over. So, I said to nobody in particular, I guess I need to call a glazier. Mrs. Patterson patted my arm. I know a guy. Very reasonable rates. And don't worry about Derek's legal fees threatening you anymore. Prosecutor Walsh overheard and smiled grimly. Mr. Morrison is going to be too busy with federal charges to harass anyone. Between the multi-state fraud operation and today's performance, he won't see daylight for quite a while. I picked up my laptop and headed toward my front door. My door. In my house. Where Derek Morrison would never bother anyone again. Best eviction notice I never had to fight.